Hey guys, thank you for tuning in to Side Piece Garage. On this episode, we're going into paint on my 1982 Ironhead. Now, if you remember, I did paint this bike a long time ago. It wasn't my best paint job. It was the equivalent of painting a BMX bike frame when you were a little kid, just taking it apart, putting it back together. So on this episode, I'm actually doing my first, I would say, more serious paint job where I'm actually taking the time and pushing my skill because I've never really done it to this level before. So what I am using is this SEM High Build Primer, Tropical Glitz, custom colors. I have three different ones. I have a Bis Black, Galactic Silver, and Magenta Candy. And it already has these ready to spray paints. So I'm using these out of an airbrush for details. And finally, we go into the 2K Clear. This stuff I've been using for a while. It's very resilient compared to cheaper Rust-Oleum paints. So before I go on too long with this intro, let's get right into it. Now, I've had this design. I just kind of taped off some ideas before going into the prepping. I put a rag down the gas tank, cut around the seal where the gasket is from the gas cap is going to meet the gas tank. If you have some paint there, the tank might bubble up from the gas leaking under your paint job. I also fill up the petcock with another rag and tape it off just to keep all those contaminants out of the gas tank as well. I started off using a wire wheel. It did not work very good because I had a cheap clear coat that really gunked up this wheel. It helped a little bit the DA, but it would take too long just DAing it. So I'm using one of these sanding, paint stripping pads on my die grinder, or I can also use the sander. I have the same sander as my polisher. I ripped down almost all the paint. It took off everything easily, much better than the wire wheel. And when even through the original paint I left on the gas tank, for the first time I painted it, which was a very not so serious paint job, I was just trying to change the look of the bike, almost like a BMX bike, like I said. So once I'm almost there, I'm going to clean off everything with that sanding disc, and then now I'm going into the orbital. I'm using a 120 grit, I believe I used on the orbital. I do the whole entire tank in a 120, and then I take an 80 grit and scuff up where I'm going to have to add a little bit of Bondo from my bar lash, from my bars hitting the gas tank because I had no steering stops. Before applying the Bondo, I'm using some prep spray and cleaning off the tank from all the dust, the dirt, contaminants, oils, anything you don't want under your paint. I do this many times with the Progress before I add anything such as the Bondo. I'm mixing up this Evercoat Rage Ultra and applying it. It's a very smooth Bondo, very thin kind of to work with versus some of the other Bondos I've used in the past were very thick and gunky, and when they dried as you applied it, they were very messy. I use an 80 grit to start shaping it at first. I do change it up, and I'm going to go to 120 on an orbital, take the heavy stuff off of that I don't need, especially in the areas I just had some extra Bondo, and it was just too much for me to hand sand very quickly. And then once all that's done, I go back into sanding one more time. I'm going to use a 180 and get it as smooth as possible and clean up this whole tank another time with the spray. All right, now once it's all cleaned and off, I did miss out on my video. I didn't get the priming process because I messed up on my end. So I'm just doing a quick wet stand with 400 after 3 coats of primer, a nice medium coat. Clean it off one more time so it's not gritty, it's nice and smooth, and I'm hitting it with the black. So during the black painting process, I did mess up, and I'll go through that a little bit more later on, but I'm doing 2 coats of the black, very medium-sized coats, so not too heavy. I don't want any runs in this, and it's very, half of the pass is covered by the next pass, and just keep going on. So finally, when the black paint is dry, it is revealed. The Bondo leached the black through the primer and made these marks. They're like an oily stain inside my paint. And they look horrible, so I have to redo it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a 400 grit and sand down that area, clean it up. I'm just trying to get that last layer of paint off. Go back down to just the primer. You don't want to go all the way down to the Bondo, is because that's what affected it. So my fix, after this is all sanded the way I want it, I'm going to hit it with a coat of primer on just the affected areas of where that leaching happens. Once I prime that area, I quickly just sand it for all the hairy scuff mark, like the dusty primer feel. Just clean that up a little bit, and I go back and I prime the whole entire tank this time. So once the whole entire tank is primed, it's going to need a final wet sand. After the final wet sand, we can go back into it and get it painted again.
After a 400 grit sand, it's nice and smooth, I hit it with 2 coats of black. Now, I realized with this paint, I don't know if it had a reaction with the primer, but it looked very matte. And I put another coat on it after the 2 coats just to see if it would brighten up, but it ended up like this. And you can compare it to the original that was like this. It was nice and shiny instead of matte, whatever. I decided to test a little piece of clear coat. It worked good on the bottom, so I decided to go ahead and put the flames on like this rear fender. Now, this is my process. I'm using 16th tape for this one, and then I use 8th tape on the other side. That's just because I had more 16th laying around. And my process is kind of just go with the flow. I had an idea on a design. I didn't have it fully planned out. It's just seeing what looks good aesthetically and going with that. I just kind of put these little splits in the flames, and it looked really good to me. And I would love to do another set like this soon. I really want to practice these flames because they're not the easiest thing to pull off, but they're a lot of fun to do once you get a hang of them. Now with the 16th, I put blue tape on top of the flames and I cut them out. And I do a different process on the other side. This is just what I thought would work better with the smaller tape, is to cut on top of that tape very lightly so you're not cutting through the line tape underneath, and you're pulling the blue tape out from the flames. Now on the other side, I did a different process, and I'll get into that in 1 second. I'm using the 8th tape, and I'll show you how much smoother I thought that went. And I think it came out a little better because there was a little bit of a pull off the 16th tape with this blue tape that was stretched across the whole tin, versus when I had 8th tape, there was a little better adhesion, and it didn't blow through on the other side of the line. So going on to the other side, I'm using everything I have left of my 1/8 inch tape, which I can do a little bit different of a blue tape process on it. Doing kind of an asymmetrical. It's going to be very similar on each side, but they're going to be different. I don't want them perfectly the same because any little difference you will see, or I will see, that will drive me crazy. So having them similar but different, I think is a nice style. It's not too crazy because the flames are always hard to have perfectly symmetrical. And I think it looks a little weird having this perfectly symmetrical flame job from the ones I've seen. Now, I did run out of 8th and had to use 16th, so I hope this doesn't blow out down here for the method I'm using. I'm going to put all these flames back in, and I'm going to start adding blue tape. I started doing this earlier, didn't get good videos, so I cut it out, and I'm just putting small pieces wherever there is a chance to get it. Just ripping it up, maybe using a razor here and there, but mostly it's just small little pieces, and I just push them on with all my might just so they don't blow out with that paint on the next coat. So now for the base of the flames, I'm using 2 coats of this Cosmic Silver. I may not know the right painting terminology, but after the Cosmic Silver, I'm spraying a piece of saran wrap I crumpled up, and I'm just patting it on there to give this marbled look of the Abyss Black going on top of it. Now, you don't want to go too crazy with this because this is not the final design, and the more black you do, more it might take away, I think. But everyone's perspective is different on this method. If you think it looks good, that's all on you. I don't know how this is going to look until I finally take the tape off. After I pat it down, have that marble look, I hit it with 3 coats of the Magenta Candy. Now, once this Magenta Candy is done, it's going to take a little while to dry, but I'm going to go into the detailed process, which I use the airbrush gun. This is a Harbor Freight unit. I got both pieces right from Harbor Freight. They're not the cheapest compared to other Harbor Freight models, but they're much cheaper than a professional unit. So I'm using a great candy and just going over all the tips of the flames. I start out and go farther and farther, so it's darkest at the point of it and it fades in at the end of it. I'm doing also a black candy in the beginning of the flame section, so the base of the flame will be darker. And the fact that I'm using a black on top of the pink, it gives it like a deep purple look at the end of it. Now, this is the most satisfying part of this whole video, is when I finally got to pull the tape and see my design in person. Now, there was a couple little chips and issues with the actual flames itself because it was rolling over onto the tape, which I might have been a little too heavy on the tape. I might not have peeled it correctly. I'm still learning, as this is my first series style paint job, so I'm going to have to also touch all that up, which is probably not the most professional way, but I'm very happy with my results by doing this method. Now, once all the tape is finally clear, I'm going to have to run my fingernail. You could use a lot of other things. I just used my fingernail because I had nothing on hand that was soft enough to not chip the paint. And a little bit of sandpaper on the edges that, like, I blew out the tape or something like that. So I clean up that, not try to, like, sand down the black paint underneath. Just try to clean up anything with my fingernail that will chip off on the edges. And then I'm going to use a paintbrush. These are pinstriping brushes. I'm just putting a little bit of the candy paint where it pulled the candy off of the silver underneath. Doing touch-ups like this, you got to be very careful because this brush will actually eat down into the base the silver I put underneath the flames. So you will start smudging all that. Don't ask me how I know. And after this is all done, you can finally move on into the clear coat process. You will make sure everything's 100% before you clear coat it. Now, I've heard people clear coating in between, doing the black, clear coat, flames, clear coat. I did not do that in this project, which I should have done, but I'm doing 3 coats of clear, medium to heavy. The first coat I'm not going to count because this is a very light tack spray, so everything adheres very well. Make sure you don't have a dusty environment, which I did, so you might see a couple of specks that I had to sand out. So this is it after 2 coats, and my final 3rd coat is the finish coat. I'm going to sand this and polish it right after I get it finished, dried, cured. I waited about 24 to 48 hours. I think it was a day or 2 before I actually wet sanded it and polished it. You can see over here I have a couple dust specks, but overall I'm very happy how this tint set came out. Even though I always show you the gas tank, it was just to make it quicker because I don't normally make a video over 10 minutes, but this one's going to go a little bit longer. So don't mind those dust specks because we're going to get them out using some fine sandpaper, wet sanding it. I'm starting my way from 1200, working my way up to 2000, changing out through the grits. The most heavy sanding is in this dust speck area right by the gas cap. Other than that, the tank was pretty clean. So I focused mostly where it needs it, where any of the orange peel or anything like that is, and I'm trying to break down these flames a little bit so it's a little bit smoother of a finish. They don't really pop out. But after few minutes of wet sanding, probably 30 minutes of wet sanding, I can clean it off. I see the dust specks are still showing through a little bit, so I wet sand a little more of the 2000 grit and move on to a polishing process. For this, I'm using the Chemical Guys products. They have 4 different compounds and the SPTA pads on this Milwaukee variable polisher. Now, this isn't the best polisher. It's not a orbital like some of the more fancy polishers, but it gets the job done. And I'll use this for many more projects because I don't have the money to buy one of the better units. Now, each pad SPTA makes is a different grit. Along with the Chemical Guys, there's 4 different grits. So you want to use the associating pad with the associating grit of polish you're using it to break it down and get that final finish as clean as possible. And I will just say one note, everything should be as clean as possible. A nice clean rag, a nice clean pad, and there's no dirt or debris that's going to actually scratch your tank when you go over it with the polishing compound. And when that's all said and done, you'll be very happy with the finish. If there's a little bit of fish hooks, maybe you have to go a little bit lighter on that last coat. There's a lot of little tips and tricks I can't even give you because I'm not the best at this yet. But I'm learning, and the more I learn, the more I can help you guys with your process of painting and polishing.
Thank you guys for watching Sniper's Garage. I'm really excited how this tint set came out. I have a lot more to do to this bike due to unforeseen circumstances. I did not make Custom Culture Fest a couple weeks ago, but I have much more going into this bike, and I'm going a little farther than I originally anticipated. So I bored out everything I installed onto the bike after my last video. I just want to keep this and me painting the tins. So thank you for watching. I'll catch you on the next video.